Hi, I'm Alwin Chong. I'm one of the co-facilitators for the cultural workshop for the MBBS program at Adelaide University. The workshop will be concentrating on a DVD called Crossing the Line, which focuses on Mornington Island and 2 medical students going there for a 6 weeks placement. Mornington Island is a very interesting place. It's situated in the Gulf of Carpentaria, Australia. But it's been the centre of a few interesting political issues that has made significant contribution to the health of those people in that community. Mornington Island was taken over by missionaries back in the 1913s, but became part of a political agenda back in the 1970s when Gough Whitlam got into power. Gough promised, as part of his leading up to the election, that he would give land rights to Aboriginal people. And one of the significant parts of that land rights was giving some of the reserves back to Aboriginal people. Joe Bjelke-Petersen, who was the Premier of Queensland at the time, decided that the land belonged to the state, even though it was on Commonwealth land. So he decided that the best way to stop Gough Whitlam getting access to the land and giving it back to the Aboriginal people was to turn them into Shire councils. So one early morning session, he introduced the legislation that converted the reserves back into Shire councils. The problem with the Shire councils, once they were incorporated or gazetted, was that there was very little resources being put back into the community. So running water, sewerage, collecting of rubbish, a whole range of things that just are part and parcel of Shire councils' work, their core business, was never done. Throughout Australia, in a lot of the townships, there were all these little fringe camps that had no access to these essential services. So the Commonwealth government decided, through Gough Whitlam, which was then honoured by Malcolm Fraser, that the Commonwealth would also put money into trying to provide these services. And as the money was going into Shire councils, there was no accountability about how the money was spent, and so there was very little money going back to the community. Often the councils would complain about the cost of putting sewage, water, electricity out to these fringe camps. There's also the argument that these fringe camps were there illegally, so they were going to be knocked down and people should be relocated back in the town area where the infrastructure was already set up. So there was this big political fight going on between the Commonwealth and the state, but at the end of the day, places like Mornington Island got very little resources, and of course that made a significant contribution to the health outcomes of these people. And even when health services started going into that community, they were still having to deal with the lack of water, the rising of the sewage system during the wet season that created more illnesses, the lack of electricity in a lot of places. The health outcomes then just kept getting worse. So we get to a point where the Commonwealth then starts deciding that they want to put more services back in the community, so you get a lot of these agencies going in without talking to each other. So Mornington Island, it's quite unique. It's not unique in an Australian context, because you can go around Australia and you see similar situations all the time, about how the protection period took away a lot of the rights, how when we come out of the protection period, that the lack of services, the noting of data around Aboriginal health, and the rising health, which has just been continuing to rise to today, and just how health services engage with the community about dealing with these problems. Yeah, so Mornington Island isn't that unique, but it's a good example of what you can see in relation to the political agenda, the health outcomes. So as medical students, what's your role in this? Do you just stop and think about hard medicine, that as a doctor you're just there to deal with the illnesses, or are you there to try and provide a much more comprehensive service for these people when they come in with multiple illnesses and multiple issues?
Thank you.